missed any of the previous classes, you can get the code of everything that we have done so far from my GitHub. So you can either clone it there, or you can just directly download the zip there if you want to catch up. And yeah, today we are going to be taking a look at our design at different screen sizes. So far we've been testing out mostly in desktop size, but of course, we don't know for sure whether our users are going to be looking at our website on a laptop or a tablet or a mobile. They might be looking at it on their phone. So we need to double check that our design looks good at all browser sizes. And so for this part of the design in particular, so the bit that we're looking at the moment is this About Me section. So I've just seen that I've lost my screen share. So let me get that back. Here we go. So we're going to be looking at this About Me section here. And for this About Me section, we have an image next to some text, or at the moment, the image is above the text. But the design that we would like to see on mobile, we would like to see the image above the text. And on desktop, we would like to see the image next to the text. And it isn't just, of course, mobile and desktop. We need to consider it's everything else in between as well. So we want to also consider, maybe a tablet size, or a tablet that's held portrait, or maybe just someone who's got loads of different screens open on their desktop and has their resolution at a really odd resolution. And when we're doing web design, there's a specific type of responsive design, which is called mobile first design, which brings a particular philosophy to the responsive design and to the code that we're writing. So we spoke about accessibility a few lessons ago, and one of the things that we didn't talk about is things like processor speed and also just internet connection speed. So most often you will find that if you're on a phone or a tablet, you're going to have less processing power than if you're on a tablet or a desktop. If you're on a laptop or a desktop. And you'll also find that they probably have less bandwidth on their phone than they might do on their computer. And your users are also going to be more conscious of things like their battery power. They don't want their mobile devices, to be doing more calculations than is necessary. And because of this, when we write our websites and when we design our websites and when we write our CSS, we want to consider the mobile users first, and then how it's going to look on larger screens. We want to make it as optimal as we possibly can for our mobile users, and then we add on the desktop styles on top of that. So we've already taken a look at some things that can help us with responsive design. So we had a look, for example, at our responsive width units and height units. We've had a look at percentage units. We've had a look at how the text wraps and things like that with screen size. We can use things like display flex to change the layout of where things are sitting. And the final thing that we're going to look at today is media queries. And media queries can be used to set a specific CSS for a different kind of media or a different feature that your screen has. So for example, some people, you might see it on websites. If you print out a website, sometimes websites have a print CSS that changes the layout of the entire website for print, so that when you print it, it looks more like a Word document. Have I got an example of what that looks like here? Yeah, so we have this media query here, and then the name print. So we're saying I want to target all of the stuff that is inside these two brackets for only print. So this is, people are only going to see this if they print out the website. We're going to be looking at media which targets a specific device width. And we can do that with a media query that looks like this. So the styles inside the curly braces will only apply if the rule, so this thing here, min width 800, is met. If the rule of that query is met, then these styles will apply. If it's not met, these styles will be completely ignored. And this is great for our mobile first design philosophy because it means that any CSS that we write inside of those braces will only get processed by the more powerful devices. It'll be completely ignored by our smaller devices, which means that we're not using extra processing power on our smaller devices. And we can use it to change the style of the site at different screen sizes. So for our purposes today, let's take another look at those designs that we're putting together and have a think about how we want the content to display. So we've got our mobile style, we've got our sort of portrait tablet, we've got our landscape tablet. And when you're designing, you can use your dev tools in your browser to change the width of your page and try out different widths until you find what we call a breakpoint that looks good. So the breakpoint for us is going to happen at some point where this text here gets a little bit too wide to look good underneath the image, and this text here has enough space to sit next to the image. So that is where our breakpoint is going to be. So if we have a look in our design, we can bring up our inspect tools, our developer tools, and we are able to drag this around and have a look at what size we might want to do that at. And I don't know if you can see it on the display, but if you see here in the top right, as I'm dragging, it's going to show me what width we are at and what height we are at. And for the sake of this lesson, I'm going to say that we're going to put a breakpoint in at 800 pixels, because at 800 pixels, there is enough space for the text to sit next to the image. Depends entirely on the image that you're using, so do change this number if you've got a slightly different shaped image to me. And then we're going to keep getting wider. But what we're also going to do is we're going to put a maximum width on this as well, because research has been done and humans don't like to read really, really long lines of text. If you have to move your head to read, people find it really difficult to read, and they will have a tendency to, browse away or to skip. So we want to also put a maximum width on this section here so that our lines of text don't get too long. We're going to need to do some styling here, which is going to allow these paragraphs of text to sit next to this image. And I don't know if you can remember from last class, so Monday's class, the property that we used to make two things sit next to each other. Does anybody remember? Flex, exactly. So we're going to be using display flex here, and we want to flex this image with this section here. So we've got, this section is going to contain these paragraphs and also this button, which means we're going to have to use a containing element that doesn't have any semantic meaning. It's just there to hold items so that we can do styling. Can anybody remember what the generic element container is called? A div. Woohoo! So we're actually using the div for reals legitimately. So what we're going to do is we're going to well, I've missed a step here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this entire section in a div, and then we're going to wrap the image and the paragraphs and the anchor tag in a div. So let's jump into the editor and do that right now. So we're back in our HTML now, and we have our about section, which has an H2 in it. And what we're going to do here is underneath the H2, we're going to open a new div, and we're going to give it a class of about info. And then we're going to close that div after the anchor tag, but before the block quote. I'm going to indent everything by 1 so that we can see that that is inside that div. And then what I'm going to do is create that second div that contains the paragraphs and the anchor tag. So after the image, I'm going to create a new div, which I'm going to give a class of about text. And I'm going to close that after the paragraph and the anchor tag. And then I'm going to indent everything again. Cool. So now what we can do is we can start styling this up. So the first thing we're going to do in our CSS now is make a new selector for our about info. And this we're going to give a maximum width of, let's say, 960 pixels for now, but we can change that. 960 is kind of a standard for what is a pleasant width. Again, this is personal choice, so you can choose this yourself. And then we're going to do some cool margin magic, which is going to make our design sit in the middle of the page. And the way that we do that is with margin not auto. So if you remember from Monday's class, we talked about our shorthands for margins. So when we have two numbers in on the margin, what we're saying is put 0 margin on the top and bottom, and put, in this case, auto margin on the left and right. And what auto does is it works out the width of the element, the width of the page, minuses the width of the element from the width of the page, gets the result, divides that by 2, and puts that on either side. So the element ends up sitting in the middle of the page. So let's just save that, and we will jump back into our browser and have a look at what that looks like. And I realize I am going super quick today, for which I apologize, but we have a lot to cover today. So yeah. So there we go. We have our maximum width, and you can see after a while it doesn't get any wider than that. Might bring it down a bit. Actually, 960 looks maybe a bit wide. We'll see what it looks like. Okay, back into our editor. In fact, while we're here, let's just briefly take a look at the slides, and we'll explain what's going to happen with our Flexbox. So we've done now a container, and we're going to put flex on the container. And what it's going to do is it's going to flex these two items. So we have our image and we have our secondary div, and our secondary div actually contains the paragraphs and the anchor tag. So here we go. Yep, we've got about text, and we're going to start styling it up for different sizes. Let's jump into the editor. We're going to put in our first media query. And there's a bunch of different ways to do media queries. You can either make one for each selector and keep the selectors together. I prefer to have a media query that I keep at the bottom of the page that contains all of the styles for that particular query. It's kind of up to you. So we're going to make a media query, which looks like this, at media. And then we're going to put our rule in. So in this case, it's going to be min width 800 pixels. So what we're saying is only apply these styles when the page is wider than 800 pixels. And on our about info, we are going to, oh, I've called it about container. Oh, we'll call it about info. We are going to add display flex. In fact, you know what? I'm going to put display flex on it outside of the media query, because we can actually make everything center nicely then. So if we do display flex and then flex direction column here, we can also say align. Oh, your assistance is not required. Coding with cat. Go on the floor with you. If we do align item center and you just take a look at your design in the browser, you will see now that at mobile styles, it looks quite nice. We've got that nice centering. I actually think the image could do with a bit more gap underneath it. Oh, she's back. I might give it I might use our spacer in here at the bottom. I can't see what I'm typing. You sit on my keyboard. Okay, so back to about info at our desktop styles. We want now, we don't want it to be just flex direction column anymore. We want it to be flex direction row. So we're going to overwrite that style. And you'll see the two now move to sit next to each other, hopefully. But we want a bit of space in between them. And CSS has this nice gap property. So we can say gap, why don't we use our, in fact, we can move this up as well. We'll use our spacing again. Off, stop. You're gonna bite me. You have to go on the floor. So I'm going to move the gap spacing above and actually remove the, oh, I put it on the wrong thing. That should have been one. I should have changed that one, but actually I'm going to remove that one. There we go. Now we don't need that margin because it's actually going to be added by the flex. So now if you take a look in your browser and you move the screen size around, hopefully you should see that at some point the image drops from being on top of the text to next to the text. But because we've got this align item center, it's not looking right. Let me just stop sharing and I'll share my browser for those of you who aren't coding along. So what we've got going on here at mobile sizes, this looks very nice. At desktop sizes, it looks a bit weird. So we need to overwrite that align items. So we're going to overwrite the flex direction and align items is going to be flex start. So that image sits at the top. And that looks kind of cool to me. We could maybe make some decisions about that break. We could maybe think about making the image a little bit responsive as well. So maybe we could involve that clamp that we saw last week and maybe make the image get a tiny bit smaller. It's kind of up to you. Do fiddle around with it and get the optimal design for the amount of text that you have for the graphic that you've chosen. The next thing we're going to look at is we're going to add in some interactivity with our CSS. So we've got this My Resume button at the moment, which looks ugly. And we want it to kind of look like our Find Out More button. So we're going to add some styles to it. And we can add in a style which is going to make it look like our Find Out More button. But our Find Out More button also isn't very interactive at the moment. Oh, I've just realized I'm not sharing my browser. Let's put the browser up. So we want our Find Out More button and our Resume button, and in fact, all of our buttons to look like this, to have this nice border. And you'll notice as we hover over it, the cursor turns into a pointer, which is the browser's way of saying this is an interactive element. But we can actually make this a little bit more visually interesting. And the way that we're going to do that is using a CSS hover state. And the hover state looks like this. It's a colon, which follows after the selector that you want to add the interaction onto. So on our button, we currently have these styles here. So we have our padding and our color. We're going to also add in a hover state. And what the hover state is going to do is it's going to fill in the background of that button, and it's going to change the text color to white. So let's add that into our CSS now underneath where our button selector is. Zoom in a bit for you. There you go. So we're going to say button hover, and we're going to change the color to be white, and we're going to change the background color to be our primary. So now when you hover over that button in your browser, you should hopefully see some nice interaction, which just makes it visually a bit more obvious that this is something that I can click on. But we've got an interesting problem now, because we have this button style, and I could apply this button style to this button, to this link here, but in the moment, the button style has a blue border and it hovers to blue. And if we put it on this blue background, it's gonna disappear. We're not going to be able to see it. So we're going to do some CSS theming here using our CSS variables. So this is super cool. We are going to create some new variables. So we're going to make a variable called button color and a variable called button hover color. And we're going to create two themes, so a neutral theme and a primary theme. So if we think about our design that we have so far, we have this sort of neutral section, and then we have this primary section, and it's going to be followed by a neutral section and then a primary section. So we can use these new theme styles that we're going to write to decide what color the button should be in that style. So I'm going to add this into the top of my CSS file. So let's jump back into my editor. Cool. So where my section is, have I got a section style? Let's put it in. Let's put it in under the body, in fact. So I'm going to create a neutral theme. And the neutral theme is going to have a background color of white. If you want, you can make white a variable as well. So we could have primary and secondary would be white in this case. We have a question. Please feel free to ask a question. We're going to create our button color, which is going to be our primary. And we have our button hover color. And it's going to be var. Oh, it's going to be white. Then we're going to create our primary theme. And we're going to set the color to white, the background color to our primary. Our button color is going to be white in this instance. And this could be your secondary color instead. And our button hover color is going to be a primary. Did you want to ask your question over the mic, or are you okay to type it? Okay, I'm going to give you some time to type while we continue on. Color is not listed in the neutral theme. Yes, because we're leaving the color as just black is the default text color. I don't want my text color to be blue or red or whatever. I'm just leaving it as black. I could put a color maybe on the body if I wanted. I quite like 333 as a default text color. I prefer gray to black. Personal choice. You can do that if you want or not. It's up to you. But that's why color's not listed. Cool. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to update now our button styles to use this button color and the button hover color. So, oh, I've just realized I'm not sharing my slides. So now that we've created those variables, we're going to use them. So instead of using the primary variable, which we used before, we're using this button color variable, which is now going to change when we apply different themes. So this is getting super complicated, but it's going to be really cool once we do it, I promise you. So let's jump back into here. Let's jump into our button. And this is now going to become button color. This is going to also become button color. This is going to become, background color is going to be button color. And color is going to become button hover color. Everybody with me so far, or are you all confused? Give me a thumbs up if you're with me so far, thumbs down if you're confused and you want me to explain a little bit more what's going on here. So at the moment, the only variables we've got are primary and spacing, and then we've created two variables that are scoped within the primary theme or the neutral theme. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply these classes to the corresponding sections. So our about class can now become a primary theme. And our header can get a class of neutral theme. And our projects is going to get a class of neutral theme. And our contract is going to get a class of primary theme. So if we save that now and jump over into our design, into the browser, we should hopefully see that we now have some nice looking buttons, and we have, oh, we haven't added the button class to anything. Before we jump back, let's do that. So on our anchor tag, we're going to give it a class of button. We can also put that class on each of these. And we can put it on the let's talk. Yeah, cool. Okay. You should be getting closer now. So now if we jump back into the browser, so this hasn't changed. Our primary still looks like it did before. We've got this nice hover. And now if we scroll down, our resume has this nice hover. And each of these buttons have the hover as well. Question from Discord. In terms of responsive web, what's the preferred units for the elements? Again, it's a kind of developer's preference, but I prefer to always use Ms and Rems. I will usually use Rems for most things if I don't want the text size to change as the page is scaling. And then if I do want the text size to change as the page is scaling, for example, like I do here with this header, then I'll use my VWs and my VHs for that. But yeah, stick with Rems is a good rule of thumb. And then Ms are useful for things like line height. Yeah, that's what I'd suggest. So our page, I mean, it's not looking perfect yet, but it's getting there. But we're getting some weirdness here. So why is this button sat here? Why is this sat underneath there? We still got a little bit of styling work to do. Oh, there's one thing that I forgot that we haven't done yet. Okay, before we get into fixing this section, there's a nice little bit of interactivity we can add here, which just shows some shows off another bit of CSS that we've not looked at yet, which is CSS filters, which are a super fun way to recolor your artwork if you want to. So we can apply Yes, I can absolutely answer that question. Let's just apply these filters first, and then I will answer that question. It's something I've not actually gone over in the previous classes, so yeah. So on our about image, where is that? We are going to On our about image, we're going to add in a filter, and we're going to make the image grayscale, which is going to make it black and white. And the filter takes a percentage, so you can say how much of the saturation you want to take away. So I want to take away 100% of the saturation. Then I'm going to put in a hover state, so about image hover, and I'm going to say filter grayscale 0. And what that's going to do is it's going to make that image grayscale until I hover over it, and then we will see the color, which I think is super cute. So now image is grayscale, hover over it, it goes to color. Kind of cute, nice little bit of extra interactivity there. So we have had a question, which is, can you briefly explain the different ways of locating web elements? I'm confused among class, name, ID, etc., etc. Okay, so at the moment, the only two ways of selecting elements that we've looked at are element selectors and class selectors. Let me jump into the CSS. So we had a look at the direct class selector, which is applying it directly onto the name of the element, sorry, the direct element selector. And we've had a look at our class selector. There is another selector. In fact, there's a whole bunch of other selectors. The main one that you will see as you traverse the web is an ID. So I could theoretically apply an ID to an element, let's say this one, and give it a name similar to the way that I have done with classes. So let's give this a name of, what should we call it? First, for now. And if I was to want to apply styles to that, I could do so by using the ID selector, which is a hash. And this would then apply a style. So let's say I wanted to give this a background color of, let's give it Rebecca Purple. Is that going to play? Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to jump back into my browser very briefly so you can see what has happened. So you can see my header now has this background color of Rebecca Purple, even though in my CSS, I wrote that style above the neutral theme. So you can see here we've got a class applied of neutral theme, and we've got an ID of first. And we know, because I spoke about it earlier, that CSS styles overwrite each other as they go down the cascade. So what is happening here? We've got this ID selector, which is applying a background color of Rebecca Purple. And then we've got this neutral theme underneath it, which should be applying a background color of white, but it isn't. And the reason why that is happening is because ID selectors are what we call more specific than class selectors. So whenever you use an ID selector, it's going to overwrite the styles that are applied to the class selector. And the class selector is more specific than the element selector. So the class selector will always overwrite whatever styles you put on the element selector. Cats, stop it. Sorry. And IDs are also interesting because you can only have one ID of a certain name on the page. So I can't now use this on here. I can't say ID equals first here because that name has already been used. So I need to call this like something else, like heading. IDs are super useful for JavaScript because they allow you to select a specific element. So if we were applying some sort of functionality to this element, IDs would be really useful. My personal belief is that we should refrain from using IDs in CSS because of this exact problem here, because they overwrite. And they basically ruin the cascade. We no longer can rely on the cascade to overwrite the things that we wrote above, because the ID is that specific. So it becomes very difficult to overwrite, and then we end up needing to give everything its own ID. And yeah, we just avoid using IDs in CSS. The rule should always be use the least specific selector you can. So your element selector is the least specific, your class is the next least specific. And then there's a whole bunch of other selectors, which I'm not going to go into in this class because I think it's just going to get too complicated. But you can select by, you can add data attributes to things. Oh, I say I'm not going to go into it, and then I start going into it. We can add data attributes to things. So I could say like data, what might I call it? Clickable. And then I can select by that if I want to in my CSS. I'm not going to go into this. In fact, we're going to have a look at data attributes when we do our JavaScript. Super useful for JavaScript, less useful for the CSS that we're doing now. So that is a very brief introduction to the different types of selectors for selecting your web elements. Yeah, I don't want to blow people's brains. So for today, we're going to stick with classes and elements. Tangent. Back to styling our page. Okay. So we've got this weirdness at the moment where our button is not sitting where we want it to on the page. So it looks fine here, but it doesn't look great here. This is sat next to it, and that doesn't look great. So what is actually happening here? In CSS, we have different ways of displaying elements. These are called our CSS display types. And we talked a little bit about the box model earlier. And the box model is also affected by our display types. And we have different display types, two of which are block and inline. We've also had a look at display flex already, and there's also display grid. So what is the difference between block and inline? We've seen what flex does. It makes things sit next to each other or sit on top of each other. But what does block do and what does inline do? So display block, most of the HTML elements that we've used so far are display block by default. So a div, a main, a footer, a header, a section, an article, an OL, all of our headings, these are all display block by default. And display block elements are going to stretch to fill the space of their container unless we set a width on them. So we can see this in action if we inspect, and for example, if we take a look at this H2 here, do you see you can't really see it very clearly because it's blue on blue, but do you see how the blue bar stretches to be the full width of its container? And then we've got some padding on there. That is a block element. A block will always stretch out to be the width that it has available. And what will then happen is the items that come after it will sit underneath it because there's no space to sit next to them because it has filled out the full width of the page. So we end up with these sort of building blocks. So when you think about block, think about building blocks one on top of each other, a tower of blocks. We then also, some elements are display inline. So our span is inline, our image is inline, our anchor tag is inline, our site is inline. And inline elements are designed to sit next to each other, so sit in a line. So think of a line of text. They sit next to each other. And we briefly had a look at what a span does. So we see this span here where we added the blue color to our name. This is sat in line because it hasn't knocked for example, the full stop or the is onto a new line. It's sat in line with the rest of the text. And the span elements take up the width of their contents. So whereas block elements take up the width of the container, span elements take up the width of their contents. And we can see this if we inspect this element. You can see the span is only the width of what is inside it. And inline elements will ignore height and width as well as top and bottom margin, because the content that's inside them is what determines their dimensions. So if we take a look at this My Resume link here, and we inspect it in the browser, we should be able to see, if we have a look at the computed styles, that we have a display of inline, which is happening by default because this is an anchor tag. And so what is happening is the element that is coming after it is sitting next to it, because by default, this is display inline. So what we are going to do on our button is we're going to add a display block to all of our buttons. But as we just learned, if we add display block, then the button is going to stretch out to be the width of the page. So we can see that happening if we add it in here. We could add in display block. Oh, that's not going to work because we put flex on that one. Let's put it on here. Okay, yeah. So here we see what will happen if we add display block, and we can see it happening on these ones here as well. They've stretched to be the width of their container. So then we also need to define a width for them. And luckily with widths, we have these really cool ways of defining the width by the content. So we can say max content here, and what that will do will stretch to be the width of what is inside it. Max content, if you've got text with multiple words. So for example, my resume, max content will, let's just see what it does here. Will be the width of those two words sat next to each other. If I said min content, you'll see what it does. It makes the words drop one underneath each other. It's the minimum space that they could take up. But we want them to sit on one line, so we're going to put display block and max content onto our button. So let's jump into our CSS and do that now. We're going to put display block in there, and we're going to say width max content. Awesome. And so now if you take a look in your browser, hopefully that button should now, the block quote should be pushed down underneath that button, and each of the buttons should be the width of their contents, which is awesome. So now it's time to move on and style up our block quote. And we're just going to do some really basic styling for this. So we're going to make it sit in the middle. We're going to give it a bit of a gap underneath the button. We're going to make the font size a bit bigger. We're going to put it in italic because quotes are often put in italic. So let's put those styles in now. So we're going to put it underneath our about info and above our media query. We're going to make a element selector. How can you separate two elements that are in line, one right next to the other? We will have a look at that in a second, Karim. We're coming to it. So I will leave that for now, but we will get there, I promise. Let's style up our block quote first. We're going to make our element selector on the block quote. We're going to give it a margin top of our spacing. And we're going to give it a font size of 2 rem. We're going to give it a font style of italic and a text align center. Make it sit in the middle. Center is spelled with an ER because we are American, in the same way that color is spelled with no U. It is what it is. And then we're going to make a site selector, which is going to be display block because we want it to drop onto a new line. is going to be margin top of 1 rem because we want just one line between it and the quote. Font size of 1 rem and a font style of normal. So we're going to get rid of that italic. Now, if you have a look at your quote, it should be sat in the middle of that About Me section, looking kind of cool. Leave that up there. Everybody, give me a thumbs up in the chat if you are with me so far. Questions, of course, always welcome. Okay, let's move on then. Oh, Puff is back. So we've got a little bit of tidying up that we can do now because we've created this neutral theme. What we did before was when we created our about section, we put a background color on the about, but we don't actually need that anymore. So on our about section, we can actually get rid of a bunch of CSS. So find your about selector and you can delete those 2 lines. Oh my goodness, it is absolute cat madness in here at the moment. Sorry, everybody. So that is now our about section all styled up. So now we can move on to the project section and we can talk about how to align those 2 buttons next to each other. So we've got an H3 in our about section. So let's make some new styles for this H3. So we're going to give it a margin bottom, a font size, and a font weight. And we've already given our project section the neutral theme. So it's already starting to look kind of styled up, which is kind of cool. So let's jump into here. So underneath our H1 and H2, I'm going to put in my H3 style. And I'm going to say margin bottom is going to be 1 rem. And font size 2 rem. And font weight. Nice. We've already put the button classes on the links. We are going to put some classes on the images that are in the about the project section so that we can apply some styles to those images. So let's do that now. So every image in your article is going to get a class of, let's call it article image. And now we can start styling these up. Similarly to how we made the image and the text sit next to each other in the about section, we're going to need to wrap our each of these articles in their own selector as well. So inside each article, what we want to have, let me jump back into the browser again. what I want to happen is I want the project title, then I want the project text, 2 links underneath that, and the image to the right-hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the text, the links, and the image in their own div so that we can apply some styles to make that layout happen. So it's going to look like this. So you're going to wrap each one in a div. Oh, we're going to wrap just the text in the div, sorry, not the image. So let's jump into our HTML and do that now. Article text. And inside of article text is going to go the H3, the paragraph, and the anchor tags. And we'll do this for each of the articles. There's a nice keyboard shortcut, by the way, in Visual Studio Code. If you hold down your Alt key, I'm on a Windows machine. I'm not sure what it is on a Mac. I'm sure someone can tell me. It might be the Option key. If you hold down your Alt key and press your up and down arrows, you can move lines up and down the page, which is super useful. I love it very much. And you can do it with whole chunks of things as well. So that's what I was just doing earlier. Cool. Okay, so now we're going to actually style up these sections. We want to make the image sit next to all the text. And we're going to do some clever things with Flex again. Option key on the Mac. Awesome. So Option and your arrow keys to move lines up and down. So first of all, we're going to make a selector for our article. So underneath our site, we're going to use an article selector. And we're going to make it display flex. And we're going to use flex direction column reverse on this, and you will see why. What this is going to do is it's going to put the image before the text. And this is going to make sense once we add the other styles in, I promise you. And what we're going to do is it's going to allow us to change the layout when the page gets wide enough to accommodate the image next to the text. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a selector for our article image. Huge kittens on your page now. Yep. We'll give them a maximum width. Don't worry too much. So article image. We're going to give them a margin bottom of 2 rem, and we'll give them a max width of, let's guess, 600 pixels for now. We'll change it when we see what it looks like at mobile. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in some styles into our media query, which is going to change how this looks at desktop. Because as you have rightly said, Karen, you've got giant kittens. So we don't want those kittens to be able to keep expanding the desktop. So in our media query, underneath our about info, we're going to make a new selector for our article. And we're going to change the flex direction at our desktop sizes. So we're going to say flex direction row here, which is going to allow those things to sit next to each other. We're going to apply a max width again. I'm going to use 960. We should probably make this a variable. Give it a margin. We're going to use our not auto trick again to make it sit in the middle. But I also want to put some spacing on the bottom. So I'm going to give it not auto, which is going to put auto either side, and then I'm going to put our spacer on the bottom. Then we're going to apply some styles to our article image. And we can, in fact, we can use our, I wonder if, yeah, let's use it here. We're going to use our gap, or gap. We're going to give it a gap of 2 rem. And then in our article image, we're going to say, we're going to change that max width because we don't want it to get too big. So we're going to say 350 pixels. And we're going to say this, which is object fit cover. An object fit is super cool because we're going to eventually replace these kittens with screenshots. What is going to happen? Object fit will make sure that the aspect ratio of the image doesn't stretch as the size of the image space changes. So if you jump over into your browser now and have a look at what is happening, you will see that your image keeps its aspect ratio. If you take object fit off, you'll find that the image gets sort of squished. So we have one last thing to do on this section. The links to me look a little bit odd, sat one on top of the other. And it would be nicer if they sat side by side. And we've spoken so far about display block. We've spoken about display inline. And there's another display value that we haven't actually looked at yet. So let's take a look. There is an aspect ratio CSS property, indeed. We don't need it here. Object fit works fine for this purpose. Yep. So let's talk about our final display property that we haven't looked at, which is inline block. And what this does is it allows us to create block level elements that sit next to each other. And it feels a bit redundant because we already have block and we have inline, but inline is specifically designed for text. So it's designed for words that are sat in line with each other. And inline actually has some interesting properties where it adds a tiny amount of space either side of your element because it's expecting it to be a word and it's expecting it to need to have a space. It also adds a tiny amount of space underneath. The space is like 2 pixels. So if you ever come across this problem and your design is like, why is that out by 2 pixels? Try swapping your image to display block and seeing if it gets rid of that 2 pixels, and then try inline block if you need things to sit next to each other. In comparison to display block, the major difference is the inline block doesn't add in that line break after the element, so the two elements can sit next to each other. So what we're actually going to do is on our button, instead of it being display block, we're going to make it display inline block. So you need to find your button styles in your CSS and change them to be display inline block. Now, if you refresh in your browser, they sit next to each other, which looks so much better, but it hasn't changed how the rest of them sit because they don't have anything to sit next to them. Awesome. This section doesn't look great because we don't have any padding. So let's add some padding. We haven't actually made a section selector. I'm not sure how we've missed that out. Let's make a section selector and let's apply some styles to the section. So underneath our H3, I'm going to make a section selector and I'm just going to apply some padding of our spacer. Better? That looks much better. Hooray. So now we can move on to the contact section. The contact section is actually looking pretty good already because we've used those element selectors. So everything is actually applying pretty nicely already. So we've already got the styled up button. We've got the styled up H3. Maybe this would look nicer if it was centered. So maybe let's do that. So on our contact section, we're going to just give it a class of contact, and then we're going to apply text align center onto contact. So let's jump into our editor and do just that. So we scroll all the way down to our contact section. And then in our CSS, we're going to create a selector for content. No, not content, contact. We're going to say text align center. And that makes that section look pretty good. I mean, that's basically all we need to do there. So now we can move on to the footer. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing great. Okay, this is awesome. I'm sorry I've like really rushed through this, but I really want us to get to the point where we have a finished and cool looking portfolio so that we can move on to JavaScript next week. So in our footer at the moment, we have all of these links. So I haven't bothered to put in the rest of the links, but hopefully you will do. And we're going to set up the classes that we need in order to style these. And we're going to put some icons in. This is the icon bundle that I am using. If you would like to also get it, you can download it here. So let me just swap to my browser briefly. These are free to use, so free for commercial use. This is Icon Finder, which is a really useful website if you ever need icons for your projects. I searched for GitHub for this one because I wanted specifically one that had GitHub in it. And then what I've done is if you click on download all, you can download the entire pack. It's going to download it as a zip file, so you're going to need to unzip it. And then what we'll do is we'll move the icons that we need from the unzipped folder into our project folder. Love Icon Finder. A lot of the icons aren't free, but many of the icons are free. So let's jump back into our CSS. If you get that downloading while we go, then it'll be ready by the time we get to it. You and React. Okay, we're going to give each of the LIs a class of social. Oh, and this is another super cool shortcut on Visual Studio Code. If you hold down Alt and click your, or Option if you're on a Mac, and click your cursor in multiple places, you can end up with multiple cursors, and then you can type in lots of places at once. So we can speed this up by saying class equals social. And then I'm going to do the same. Nope, I'm going to call this social item, sorry. The UL is going to be class social. And the anchors are each going to get a class as well. They are going to be social link. Type. Today is not a typing day for me. What's the name of the pack with all the icons that we want? So the one that I'm using is called PyCons, P-I-C-O-N-S, PyCons Social Icon Pack. The one. And then, as well as giving each of the anchors the social link, we need to give them each their own class because they're each going to get their own icon. So we could do this with an ID. We're not going to. We're going to give them each a class. So this is going to be LinkedIn. No, hand in the wrong place on the keyboard. This is going to, in fact, I can't. I call that one LI. This one is going to be MA. This one is going to be GH. This one is going to be AN, because it's, and obviously make links for the social media that you have that you would want to share. If you've got Facebook or YouTube or Blue Sky or Threads or whatever it is that people are using these days, put those in there. Or if you're just making a link of useful resources, yeah, whatever it is that you would like to link to, use your own little class names for those. So we are going to style up the footer first. So jumping into our CSS now. Going to make a selector for the footer. We're going to set the background color to a nice dark gray color, or whatever color you would like. I'm going to set it to my favorite 333. We can do a brief aside into color, CSS colors at the end, if that would be interesting to anybody, and what is hash 333 and why is that gray, and why is 0595 CD turquoise, if we've got time. So we're going to set it a nice dark gray color. We're going to set the color to be white. And we're going to give it some padding. So the same padding that we gave everything else. So it's our spacer. And then by default, our list item elements sit one on top of the other. So at the moment, if you look in your browser, you're just going to see 4 links all sat one on top of the other. But we want them to sit next to each other in a row. What do we use to make things sit next to each other? Flex, yeah. So we are going to flex and flex direction. Love it. Thank you, Colette. We are going to make a selector for our social. And it's going to be display flex. No. Could be grid too. It could be grid. So the rules for whether or not you use flex or you use grid is, do you have a single row or a single column? And if it's a single row or a single column, you use flex. If you have multiple rows or multiple columns, you use grid. So at the moment we have a single row, so we're going to use flex. So we got display flex. The default setting is row for flex, so we don't actually need to set the flex direction, but we are going to make them sit in the middle. Cats. Stop. My housemate is out, so the cats are not getting the attention that they require, which means that they are both running around my living room like it's some kind of assault course. And we're going to give it a margin bottom of our spacing. So that it doesn't touch the copyright text. Then we're going to style each item itself. In fact, let's not forget our gap property. So gap is a relatively new property. Gap came in when grid came in, and it was originally designed to only work with grid, but it now works with flex as well in most modern browsers, which we love. So we're going to give it a gap of, let's give it 2 rem, and we'll see what that looks like. We should probably make 2 rem a variable as well if anybody is feeling like doing that. So now if you have a look in your browser, you should see that you've got 4 text links sat next to each other in the middle of your footer. But we want the links to be little icons. And then we're going to add those icons with background images, which is why we gave each of them their own class name. So firstly, we're going to make a selector for our links. So we'll say social link. In fact, we may not have even needed the social item class at all. We'll see. So social link, and we're going to make it display block, because as we know, links are display inline by default. And we need to apply a width and a height to it. We're going to make it display block. We're going to set a width of 60 pixels and a height of 60 pixels. This is one of the few times where using absolute units is absolutely fine, because 60 is sort of finger size on mobile, so it'll be nice and easy to press on mobile, and it'll be nice and easy to see on desktop. We want to hide the text completely, so we are going to make the text transparent. So we're going to say color transparent. We're going to say font size 1 pixel. So what that's going to do is it's just going to make the font really tiny, but it's going to be readable in the screen readers. I might have missed it. When did we pop the icons in place of text? We still haven't done that yet. We're getting there. We are going to give it a background repeat of no repeat, because by default, when you add a background image to CSS, it will repeat, because it's made for sort of repeated background patterns. So we're going to set background repeat to no repeat, and we're going to set background size to 60 pixels, so that it's going to take up the space of this element. And now what we need to do is we need to add each of those little logo graphics that we've just downloaded into our project. So I have got LinkedIn, GitHub, Mastodon, and Instagram. I'm not even certain if that pack has a Mastodon logo. Let's take a look. In a semicolon after no repeat. Thank you, eagle-eyed Colette. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you. So these are all the icons that I've downloaded. So this is after I have unzipped the package that downloaded, and the ones that I want are, so I want Twitter. So I want this one with the little circle. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag that directly into my project. I'm going to try sharing my entire screen and we will see whether this is just completely unviewable to you. Puff, excuse me. Hang on. That is not yours. Yep, she stole, a friend of mine made this little felted pony for me, which is definitely not for the cats. Okay, sharing my entire screen. It's going to get a bit meta. We can see me in here. What I am going to do is I'm going to take this Twitter icon and I'm just going to, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a folder. So new folder in my project, and I'm going to call it social icons. And I'm going to drag my Twitter icon into there. Let's see if we can find a GitHub one. Nice, there's a GitHub one. That's going in there. Let's see if there's Mastodon. No. Nice try. Let's put YouTube instead. Nice roundy YouTube one. I'm sorry. Can you sort of see what I'm doing? I'm basically just dragging them from one folder to another. Hopefully this is something that you all know how to do. What was the final one? LinkedIn. Zoom in with your browser. That. Oh God, too much. No. I don't think zooming in is going to help here. Windows magnifier tool. Yep. Well, I'm just going to stop sharing, and we'll go back to our editor. Okay, so the ones that I've chosen are the ones that have nice little circles around them. If you're choosing an icon set, it's usually a good idea to choose ones that match. I now have this folder with social icons in it with the 4 icons that I am going to choose. You can, of course, choose whichever ones you like. And now what we're going to do is we are going to add these in as background images. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make selectors for each of those classes that we made. So I'm actually close that, drag that across there. So this is no longer going to be Mastodon. This is going to be YouTube. Obviously, if I was actually building this website, I would find a font, find an icon set that had a Mastodon icon, and I would use that. But for now, let's just make it as easy as we can. So I'm going to make a .li class and a .youtube class and a GitHub and a Instagram. Oh, Instagram was the one I forgot. What did I get instead? LinkedIn, YouTube. Oh, I got Twitter, didn't I? Oh, Twitter. And for each of these, we're going to apply a background image. I'm going to use our nice little trick with the Alt to allow me to type in multiple places at once. And we're going to say background image is, and the background image takes a URL, with curly brackets, and then you can use quotes or not, it doesn't matter. And we're going to point it to that folder that we just created. So the folder in my case was social icons, and then a slash, and then we want to choose each of these. In fact, those are terrible names to type, so I'm going to rename each of these icons. So this is going to be YouTube. This is going to be GitHub. This is going to be LinkedIn. Someone has asked a question. CSS variables where CSS... I'm not sure what that question is, so I'm going to ignore it. We're going to now apply our social icons. So for my LinkedIn, I'm going to apply li.png. Then on YouTube, I've got youtube.png. Then here I have github.png, twitter.png. I don't think that's really necessary. I don't think this is adding that much mess. I think that might be overkill to add the URLs as variables. So now we have hopefully some icons in our footer. If you look in your browser, you should be able to see them there. They are black at the moment and we want them to be white, so we can apply a filter to the social link. So we can say filter. We could, of course, edit the images as well. So I'm going to say filter, and I want to invert it 100%. Colette, you can't see the icons. Can you see my HTML file? Yes, you can. Let me zoom out a tiny bit so that's a bit more legible. There you go. So this is how it should look so far. We need semicolons on the end of here. Colette, would you be comfortable sharing your screen and we can see if we can debug, or have you got it working? If we've got any of the orgs in here, are they able to give Colette permissions to share their screen? You think you're missing some class names. Okay, cool. So make sure that on each anchor, you've got a social link, and then you give each one a little class name depending on what social it is. Yeah, can somebody give Colette screen sharing privileges? And I will stop sharing. So if you can share your editor with us, Colette, and we can take a look. can't access my screen. Oh. Oh dear. It's up to you. You can download them as PNGs or SVGs. If you download them as PNGs, which is what I did, I think I set it to 128 pixels maybe. Smaller is what you want. SVGs, super cool. You don't need to set a size. And you could also directly edit the SVG to be white if you wanted to. Cool. Bedros, if you're happy jumping in to help Colette out, I will keep going. Yeah, the things that you want to double check, Colette, are that you've got the social link class and you've got each individual social name class. Missing class names on tags, on your A tags. Okay, cool. Up is back. So one of the, you got it working now. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I was going to say one of the other lovely things that we can do with Visual Studio Code is we could have done a live share, but we'll maybe leave that for once we get to JavaScript. So I'm going to share my browser and just show you what I've got now. Oh, oh, Puff is sat on the keyboard. Get off. Let's try that again. I'm going to show you where we've got up to. So we now have some icons here, which we get that the nice little cursor pointer because they are links. What a pain this cat is. Where did we get up to? Okay, we've done all of this. There we go. Okay, now we're going to add in some interaction into our icons, because at the moment they're not very interactive. So we've got this nice hover state, but we want something on these icons. And so we're going to do some CSS animation, which is my absolute favorite. So the animation is going to look like this. We're going to put a transition on the hover, and the transition is going to change the size of the button. I did a color change. Okay, ignore that. We're going to change the size of the button. So back into our editor. On the social link, we are going to put our transition on. So we're going to say transition, and we want to transition all, and we want to transition it over, let's try it over 0.3 seconds. And with our animations, we can put what is called an ease on, which changes how the animation applies. So my favorite ease is ease in out. What that does is it starts slow, gets faster, slows down. I think that's an attractive way to do animations. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say social link hover, and we're going to change the scale to be transform scale, and we're going to say 1.1. Let's try that and see what that looks like. Maybe 1.2. So now when you hover over your social icons, you should see them go whoop, whoop. Yeah, I haven't shared the browser yet. I will share it. There you go. So get this cute little animation. Maybe it's a bit slow. Maybe we'll make it 0.2 seconds. That's a bit nicer. Lovely. So the final thing to do is just to put the this copyright text. We're going to center that. Something that I've not mentioned at all is that nesting is now supported in CSS in some browsers. And since we're in Chrome, nesting is supported in Chrome. So we can actually, we don't need to give our paragraph a class. We can actually just do this. And then we can say text align center. And it's going to move our text into the center. Oh, and I realize I'm not sharing my code. There we go. So what I've done here is I've nested this P selector inside of the footer selector. So what I've said is any paragraphs that are inside the footer are going to have this style text align center. So that's super cool. Okay, how much time have we got? We have 20 minutes. There's a whole load of other things that we can do. So one of the things that we had in our original design, I had some nice diagonal lines underneath each of these sections. So I had a little sort of triangle shape under here. And I think we can maybe spend the next 20 minutes talking about making shapes with CSS and using the before and after pseudo selectors. So let's give that a go now. Okay, so we've done our transforms. Let's talk about how to make shapes. So again, Chris Coyer saves the day. He's made this amazing illustration of all of the shapes that you can make with CSS. So if you'd like to have a look at what's possible, you can do so here. It gets very, yeah, it gets quite exciting, like this little tiny arrow, stars and hearts and all kinds of things. These are made with just a div and some CSS. There's no images being rendered here. So this is cool. The shape that we are going to be looking at using today is this shape here, the triangle top left shape. And there's a really useful tool for generating your own triangles, which I use quite frequently, which is this one. And so we, for example, want the top left tool, and it'll give us the CSS to create that shape. Oh, this is going to be the triangle that goes inside the header link button. Okay, let's do that one first then. So back into our design again. So ignore me, we're not going to do this triangle here. We're going to do the tiny triangle that was on the find out more button, which means we don't want that triangle. We want that triangle instead. So back into our HTML, we are going to put in a class on that header link on the button that's in the header, we're going to give it a class of header link. Where's my editor? There we go. So on the one that says find out more, we're going to give it also a class of header link. And then in our CSS, we are going to use our pseudo elements. And the pseudo elements are super cool. They act as if they were another element inside of the element. So what we call the first child of the selected element, and they allow you to insert content into the element without it actually being in your HTML. So into our HTML here, we are going to, I'm going to put it underneath the buttons. I'm going to put a selector for our header link. And I'm going to use our pseudo class. So a pseudo, we have the options of before and after. So before we'll obviously insert content before the content that's in the element, and after we'll insert content after the content that is already in the element. So we're going to use the after pseudo selector, and that looks like this. So I'm just going to say after the text that is in the header link, so after the find out more, insert this content here, and the content is going to just be an empty string at the moment. But then what we're going to do is we're going to build our little CSS triangle. Whenever you are using the before and after pseudo selectors, you always have to insert content, even if you're not actually adding any text in there. So let me just show you what this does. So I could say hello world in here. And if I jump into my browser, you can see it's added the text hello world into there. So that is what the after content does. We're not actually adding text in, we're just adding in an element that we can style. But if you don't add in that content and the empty string, then the after element will not render. So we always have to remember to put content in. So content and empty string, and then we're going to build that little triangle. Let's just do it in here actually. So using our triangle generator, jump back into the browser. Using our triangle generator, we want something like this, a triangle that's about that shape, but we certainly don't want it to be that big. So let's make it, for now, let's make it 20 pixels wide and 10 pixels high. And we're going to take all of this CSS here. Just zoom in again so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to take all of this. And so you can see what it's doing is creating an element that is width 0, height 0, border style solid, border width. What it's doing is it's applying a little border to an element that has 0 width and 0 height, and then it's putting some color on there. So we're going to take all of that and add it into our header link. And obviously we don't want this color, we want it to be our primary. In fact, we don't want it to be primary, do we? We want it to be our button color. And so that is going to add in a nice little triangle after our header link text. So if you have a look in your browser, you should see a little triangle there. You can change the shape and size of it. So I think I maybe, instead of using pixels, I'm going to go back to our rems. So I'm going to make it 1 rem. And then we want to change the color of our little triangle when we do a hover. So we're going to say header link hover after. So this is changing the color. We're going to say border color. Basically going to copy this and change button color to button color hover. And now, if you have a look in your browser, why is that breaking? We might need to take all the other styles as well into the hover. Can anybody see a typo that I've made? Oh, is it button? I think it's button hover color, not button color hover. Button hover color. Yes, I got the color wrong. Why 2 colons? Good question. Because these are pseudo elements, they aren't, what's the word that I'm looking for? So with hover, we have a, what's it called? An element state, that's it. So we are able to select the state of the element, whereas this is actually adding a pseudo element in. So we could, instead of hover, we could say perhaps visited. So you may have seen while you're traveling around the internet that when you've clicked on a link and it's visited, it turns purple. There is a whole bunch of different states that we can select. But after is different. After is adding in a pseudo element rather than selecting, as Bedros has said, a pseudo class. So selecting a state of the element. If I jump into my browser very briefly, I will show you where I currently am. So I have this little triangle, and when I hover, it changes to white, but the triangle isn't sitting where I want it to sit. So I want it to sit in the middle and in line with our Find Out More button. And as we already know and love, we have Flex, which is going to help us out here. Pickle is crying as if she has never eaten a day in her life, and I let her starve because I'm such a horrible human being. So we're going to make a selector for our header link. And we're going to use our display flex to make the arrow sit in line with the text. And then we're going to use our favorites, justify content center and align items center. Lovely. And now if you take a look at your button, that arrow should be sat next to your text. We can use our gap as well to maybe create a bit of space between the two. I think that's actually ugly. I think I want this a bit smaller. Make it 0.5 rem. That looks nicer. Lovely. Okay, we have 7 minutes remaining and still so much to get through. I'm going to briefly share my browser and we'll take a look at what we have done so far. So we've got now this beautiful button with this little hover element. What we haven't actually done is made this button go anywhere. So we want that button to cause the page to scroll down to this section here, the About Me section. So what we can do is we can use our IDs and our anchors to make that scroll happen. So if we just jump into the editor again, we're going to add an ID onto the main. So we're going to say ID equals main. And then this is just going to scroll to main. So now if you click on find out more, it will automatically jump to the find out more to the main section of the website. There is some CSS to make scroll smooth, and I can't remember what it is. Let me just look it up. Scroll behavior smooth. Awesome. So into our CSS we go. We are going to make a new selector for the HTML. And we are going to say scroll behavior smooth. And now when you click on that link in your browser, where is my browser? Here. Now when I click on this link in my browser, oh, look at that. Nice smooth scroll down to my About Me section. We have so much more that we could have covered today. We haven't talked about creating those little triangles further down in the design. So these things here. I will, of course, share the slides. So if you are interested in adding these things into your design, you absolutely can. All of my notes are in the slides. So we haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about, oh, we did talk about clamp. That's cool. We haven't talked about adding a fav icon, which you can absolutely do, which will add in the tiny icon that you see up here. So we can add a fav icon into our page as well. We haven't talked about hosting. We have 4 minutes, so why don't we do that right now? In fact, since we need to commit all of this to Git anyway. So what we're going to do, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can put this website online. We're going to do it with GitHub and GitHub Pages. If you already have a website set up on your GitHub Pages, you do not need to follow this. This is only if you do not have a website set up on your GitHub Pages. So we are going to remember to commit all of our work. We're going to open up a new terminal. We're going to do our git add and add everything. We are going to git commit and say, what did we do today? Added styles for rest of page and social icon images. Push it. Git push origin main. And then we're going to jump over into GitHub, into the browser. We'll see if this works. So I gave my project a name of GDG Workshop, but I can actually rename it somehow. There we go. I can rename it and I can call it, this is jofrank.github.pages. Is that the correct URL for creating your GitHub pages? Someone in chat remind me what it should be. Oh, .github.io. I already have one, so I'm just going to go delete the one that I already have. So I'm going to rename this. Why change the name on GitHub? You will see. So the reason why I'm changing the name on GitHub is because GitHub actually gives you some website hosting for free, which is super cool, and it gives you a URL. So if we change the name of our project to, where's my project gone? If you change the name of your project specifically to your username, which mine is this is Jo Frank, .github.io. So if you change the name of your repository to that, and then you visit that URL, your website should be rendered there. She says, hopefully, but maybe not. What do I need to do to make that work? It might just be that it takes some time to happen. That's a shame. Maybe they have changed the way GitHub Pages works. Oh, sorry about that. I thought I was going to be able to give you a nice URL to be able to share in the future. Okay, never mind. Erase and rewind. Anybody know why that hasn't worked? Do I now need to use Jekyll in order to have a GitHub Pages site? Surely this should just work with a basic HTML. Maybe it just takes time to propagate. Yeah, that's a shame. Oh, no, it has worked. It just took time to propagate. There we go. Panic over. If we go to, oh, you can't see the whole window. So this is me going to, this is jofrank.github.io, and my whole website is there live. So if you change your GitHub name to your username.github.io. GitHub will provide you with a URL, and you can start sharing that with people to show off what it is that you have done in this class. So yeah, there is my awesome portfolio. The link to the slides, let me get you that so that you can keep working through this if you so wish. Here is the link to today's slides. So there's a little bit of extra stuff that we didn't get to cover today, but we are mostly done with our portfolio, which means on Monday we're going to start with JavaScript, which is super exciting, which means we're going to start adding some fun functionality into some fun little projects we're going to build. We're going to build a typing game. We're going to build a to-do list. We're going to build a... If we have time, we'll build a little like Instagram for dogs. And yeah, thank you as always for attending. I know this was like such a super whirlwind class, and I hope that you, I didn't lose you all. I hope you can watch the video back, maybe at like 0.5 times speed. Do have a look at the slides. All of my notes for what I'm saying, most of what I'm saying, are in the slides, so you can read through as well if you prefer to read rather than watch the videos. And you can always reach out to me if you're stuck. I'm at This Is Jo Frank on most of the socials, so to give me a shout. I'm also now in the Discord, so you can give me a shout in the Discord. Yeah, if not, I will see you on Monday.
All right. Thank you, Jo, again. It's so nice to see that everyone is following along, and you're doing such an amazing portfolio page. So yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. We will be, as always, putting up this session on the playlist on YouTube and sharing the slides. And yeah, see you all next week. Yeah,
Yeah.
enjoy the rest of the week and your weekend, and see you soon, and thank you, Jo, again.
My pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.
Oh, someone's asking for the Discord link. Bedros, get on it.
Yeah, or Faye. All right, see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.